Throughout the course, we've been breaking up every layer into its own section so that we can deep dive into them. For layers 5, 6, and 7, we're going to combine them all into this one section, and it's not because these layers don't have any important concepts to learn, but rather because they belong to the single application layer of the TCP stack, even if they're separated in the OSI model. And this grouping of the application, presentation, and session layers from the OSI model allows users to interact with software applications. And in fact, web browsers like Google Chrome and Firefox typically handle all functions in layers 5, 6, and 7, and they interface with your operating system to push or receive the correct information. And so in this lesson, we're going to take a closer look at how that happens and what these layers do, starting with layer 7, which is the application layer. This layer is used by network applications such as browsers like Google Chrome and Firefox, email clients like Outlook and Gmail, communication applications like Discord, and the list goes on. These applications use what's called application layer protocols such as HTTP, FTP for file transfer, POP and SMTP for email, and DNS in order to communicate. So in a nutshell, this is the layer that enables applications to both send and receive information, and then display that data to end users. Without the application layer, none of the other layers would matter in the context of many applications because they wouldn't be able to make use of them. And so this layer is often referred to as the human-computer interaction layer, since this is, quote unquote, the layer that humans interact with. Next, we have layer 6, which is the presentation layer. And the presentation layer takes data from either the application layer, in the case of data being sent, or takes data from the session layer, in the case of data being received, to define how it should be encoded or decoded, encrypted or decrypted, and compressed or decompressed. Now, whereas we can generalize that most of the other layers are just concerned with moving bits around, the presentation layer is more concerned with what the data represents and how it should be displayed. And so if, say, an HTTP request from the application layer is asking for a certain content type, that header tells the presentation layer how to properly prepare the content for the application layer. For example, users and applications oftentimes transfer data such as strings, dates, or even integers. And because different systems may handle characters differently, this layer helps make sure that these different systems handle the data correctly by converting the information into a generic and abstract format. This is also the layer where encryption and decryption occurs, which is important, of course, for both privacy, but also for authentication. Now, as we mentioned, we can also find compression in this layer, which is primarily used to reduce the size of information that's being transmitted, which can help reduce bandwidth requirements and increase performance. Finally, we have layer 5, which is the session layer, and this essentially acts as a bridge between the presentation layer that we just talked about, which is layer 6, and the transport layer, which is layer 4, and which we covered in the prior section of the course. And this layer helps track communications between systems via application sessions, and it also deals with authentication and authorization. Now, to do that, this layer helps establish, control, and end sessions between local and remote applications. So let's say, for example, that you want to establish a connection with a website. Before you can establish this connection, you'll need to authenticate, meaning you need to verify who you are. And this would be like showing your identification card to a police officer in order to prove that you are who you say you are. Then, once your identity has been established, you might try to access private resources. Now, at that point, you also need to go through authorization, meaning that even though you've proven your identity, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have access to those resources, which may require a certain level of authorization. And back to the police officer example, if you're on private property that doesn't belong to you, even though you've authenticated, you're still not authorized to be on that private property. Now finally, once you've both authenticated and authorized, and once the network layer has determined the best path for downloading those files, the session layer helps keep track and it helps make sure that you download the correct information. So in conclusion, this is how layers 5, 6, and 7 work together, but also how they work with layers 1 through 4 to both send and receive information. You may now complete this lesson and move on to the next.